thank you for joining us. We are eager to hear about Apfo, and to learn from you and with you. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I think, okay, so looks like I have a share screen opportunity. So I'll just do that because I have the presentation. That will work like this. Okay. Can everybody see this? Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to be giving an overview of APFO, the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. As sort of a preview, so APFO is really a regulatory mechanism, and it's based on the general plan. So there's actually a chart in the general plan that indicates how many housing units can be built each year in Howard County. So that's why we want to start with this. The general plan is a planning document, land use plan, that's adopted every 10 years. And I believe Mary Clay from our office, from DPZ, gave a presentation on the general plan. Is that correct? You guys remember that? I think it was about a month ago or
Yes.
So, okay. So basically, yeah, so she probably explained that we're working on a new general plan right now called Hoco by Design. And in fact, in the next few weeks, there's going to be a growth summit that's going to present growth scenarios, 4 different scenarios that will be out for the public for public participation. So if you haven't signed up, please sign up for that to be able to participate and get your feedback on these scenarios. They're important because when the general plan is adopted, that's really how APFO is then comes into reality. Basically, it sets the pace of growth in the county. So this is the Hoco by Design. The last general plan was adopted in 2012. This is anticipated to be adopted about in 2022, early 2022. And it sets the growth pace. This is sort of a PERT chart of how it works. You have the general, or sometimes it's known as the comprehensive plan. It's really the guiding land use document, and it's updated about every 10 years. All counties in Maryland have a general plan. State law requires counties to update their general plan. It's a land use document with policies and projections. And it's really the overriding guiding document, and the capital budget is dependent on it, and same with the APF regulations. The APF regulations are part of the subdivision regulations, and they're considered implementing regulations. And since the general plan and the APF has projections for housing units, they're tied together, they're coordinated together, and so the future infrastructure needs that are in the capital budget, roads, schools, fire, police, etc., are tied to the APFO projections. And so APFO came around in the 80s here. So actually, the APFO was adopted in 1992, and the reason is because in the 80s there was about 3,000 housing units built per year in Howard County. This was when Columbia was going very strong, and so APFO was created in 1992 to slow growth, and it actually had that effect. About 2,000 units per year were built in the 90s, and about 1,500 units per year were built in the 2000s. And that was a result of APFO. So the 1990 general plan set the pace of 2,000, and the 2000 general plan set the pace of 1,500 units. And then the 2010 general plan, or the 2012 general plan, Plan Howard 2030, kept that same pace. So we've been building about 1,500 units per year in the county over the last 10 years as well. There's 3 tests associated with the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. They're known as the allocations test, the schools test, and the roads test. The roads test doesn't stop or pause growth, whereas allocations in the schools test can stop growth temporarily to allow the county time to be able to fund and build infrastructure like schools. So the way the roads tests work is the developer would submit a subdivision plan along with a traffic study, and then the traffic study would show the road impacts from the development. And then the developer is responsible for mitigating the impacts. So they would widen a road, add a left-hand turn lane, for example, signalize an intersection, and the developer is responsible for paying for those improvements. And once they pay for it, and once the improvements are completed, the development can move forward. The allocations, the schools tests are different in that they can stop the development. They allow county the time to build the infrastructure. So the allocations test, I keep saying that word. So allocations basically equals a housing unit. So one allocation is equal to one housing unit. And it doesn't matter the type of housing unit. It could be a single family detached house. It could be a townhouse or an apartment or condo. It's equal to one allocation. In the general plan, there's a chart that allocates so many housing units per year that can be built. And I'll show that chart in a second. Once those allocations are reached for a year, then projects are placed on hold. So projects are tested when they first come in, and if all of the allocations are taken for a year, the projects get placed on hold until the next year when another slew of allocations are given out. Each year, the county council, typically in July, adopts a new allocation chart, which indicates how many more housing units can be built for the following year. So projects can be held up for a year or longer, depending on how long the waiting list is before projects are built moving forward. The allocations are given out by designated place type. This is based on the current general plan. The new general plan will likely change this sort of scheme here. Every general plan, we come up with a different projection system based on the current situation in the county. The current general plan, Plan Howard 2030, has these designated place types. One is the growth and revitalization area. That's the pink areas. That's where the general plan policies indicate where a lot of growth is meant to occur. So, for example, there's a policy to redevelop large parts of the Route 1 corridor, and the zoning was changed to accommodate that with different zoning categories, like transit-oriented development, which is mixed-use zoning that allows for townhouses and apartments, and also commercial square footage, office and retail near transit stations. And there's other areas called CAC, Community Activity Center, along the Route 1 corridor. So most of the units are allocated in these pink areas. Other parts include the Columbia Village centers. Downtown Columbia has its own allocation pool. The next chart will show these numbers. Downtown Columbia plan was adopted in 2010, and so there's a plan associated with it, and so the allocations are tied to that plan. Other areas include the Maple Lawn area as a growth area. Emerson is a growth area. And these are pretty much finished at this point. And again, this was adopted about 10 years ago, and we're going to update that with this new process that we're doing now. Also, areas along the Route 40 corridor have some zonings designations that are intended to, redevelop parts of Route 40 corridor, have the opportunity to do that. So that's the growth and revitalization areas. The brown area is what's called established community. And that's really, growth can still happen, but it's mostly going to be infill and redevelopment. So smaller subdivisions would be built in those areas. And then the rural west is everything west of the planned service area boundary. This is the planned service area line. Everything east of that line has public water and sewer. Everything to the west is no public water and sewer, and there's a lot of ag preservation in the rural west. It's all well and septic. So that's its own area too. So here's the chart. As I mentioned, this chart is in the general plan. The new general plan will have an updated chart. The total numbers add up to 1,850 units a year, which is the same pace of the other previous general plan. So the pace has been really consistent for the last 20 years. Plus, on top of that 1,800 is the downtown Columbia plan was added when that plan was adopted in 2010. So right now, these are the allocation numbers countywide currently set. The rural west is 100. The established communities, the infill areas is 400. Actually, it's up to 600. There's an amendment, and then the growth and revitalization is 1,000. This green neighborhood is a incentivized pool of allocations for developers to access if they develop environmentally sustainable projects or practices when they develop. So that's sort of the current situation. What this shows is a history of allocations since the first allocations were adopted in 1995. The plan started, or the ordinance started in 1992. It looks 3 years out in the future. So if a plan comes in today, we actually grant them 2023 allocations based on the chart that was adopted in July 2020. So it's always 3 years ahead. So when the law was adopted in 1992, the first allocation year was 1995. Wherever it's closed, that means that there were units that came in that exceeded the cap in that area at any given, by the end of the year. And so you can see pretty much all years, there were areas of the county that were closed to development due to allocations. Particularly in the 2000s, this is when the market was very strong and there was a lot of housing demand. So there was a lot of areas that were closed, which basically means developers had to wait a year or two to get out of the waiting bin. The reason these areas are different, they're associated with each general plan. So this is the areas that were adopted for the 2000 general plan. This was for the 1992 plan, goes back quite some time. This is the current plan that I just mentioned and showed you in further detail. And of course, when we do Hoco by design, it's likely going to change moving forward as well. This is important to note here. The last 3 years, demand has really slowed, meaning that there hasn't been any areas closed because the allocation numbers have been exceeded. And one of the main reasons for that is the schools test, which I'm going to talk about next. So what happened is the schools test is taken after allocations are received. So once the project gets its housing unit allocations, it takes a school capacity test. And the school districts within which that development is located has to be projected to have a capacity utilization rate less than these values here, depending if it's elementary school district, an elementary school region, which is really an aggregation of 6 or 7 or 8 elementary schools, all sort of contiguous to each other. I think there's like 6 or 7 regions. There's about 40 elementary school districts. Middle school district, there's 20 middle school districts, and high school districts. So the development has to pass all of these. They take 4 tests, and all of the capacity utilizations in the year they're projected to be built, which is 3 years hence, have to be less than these percentages. If the project fails, then they're held up and they're retested each year. The county council passes a new school capacity test chart when they adopt a new allocation chart each July typically. Per the APFO regulations, they have to adopt the chart once a year, and that's typically done in July. The way that the chart works, we get the chart from the Howard County Public School System, and then we pre-file it, and then the county council votes on the chart. They don't get to vote on the numbers in the chart, either the allocations or the school capacity chart. It's either an up or down vote, and it's a resolution. It basically resets the situation every year. Projects can be held up to 4 years. They basically take the test. If they fail, they take it again the next year. They can take a maximum of 5 tests, which means they can be held up. If there's a test on either end of the equation there, they can be held up for up to 4 years. If they don't pass within 4 years, they get to go forward regardless. You can't hold up private development rights indefinitely. So courts have looked at APFOs all across the country, and they've considered the good governance if it paces in terms of APFO, but there's limitations to it. You can pause growth, but you can't hold up growth forever. For Howard County, it's the 4 years, which has been in effect since 1992, since the beginning of APFO. So this is the chart that we get from the school system that gets adopted by the county council each year. And this is the elementary school chart. This is kind of a blown up version of it. As you can see, it shows which schools are closed in the northern region The whole region is closed because the whole region is over 105%. This is the current chart that's in effect now, adopted last July. And the school districts in red are closed because they're also over 105% capacity. Polyfield Station is open in the north at 102.9%. Middle schools, there's 5 schools out of the 20 or so that are closed. And high schools looks like this. This is shows the number of school closures in any given APFO year. And you can see that there was quite a few closures in the history of APFO in the 2000s. And we had a recession here in 2008, so there was not much of an issue. And then more recently, we have a lot of schools closed. And that's one reason why projects aren't coming in right now and why they're not even seeking allocations, is because much of the county is closed. This is largely a result of recent legislation. It's not too recent now, actually. It was adopted in 2019, I believe, or 2018, that basically reduced the percentage of when schools are closed from 115% to 105% for elementary schools, and from 115% to 110% for middle schools. And it added a high school test. There used to not be a high school test, so the high school test was added. So currently there's 26 elementary schools closed, which is more than half of the elementary schools. Middle schools, there's 5 closed. This shows sort of the history of middle school closures. And then high school is brand new, started last year, and there's currently 5 schools. This map shows sort of a composite of all what's closed in the county. The red is elementary, the blue is middle schools, and the sort of the polka dots is high schools. And they overlap, the school districts overlap geographically. And the white areas on the map would indicate which parts of the county, if a subdivision were to come in, it would pass the schools test moving forward, but the other ones would be closed currently. This shows the history and sort of the effectiveness of APFO. This shows the total number of units that have been whole in any given year. And keep in mind, the county has built on average, about 1,500 new homes a year over the last 20 or so years. And so in any given of those years, a fair number of them would be on hold until, basically on a pause until the schools would open up, either through redistricting, the construction of a new school, the addition of a new school, or just demographic changes would create that the capacity issues would be relieved. And this is really just to show that the county has built a lot of schools over the past 20 plus years when APFO began in 1992. And this is sort of all the schools that are built. The last school was Hanover Hills, built in 2018. The next school will open up in 2023, and that's New High School 13. So there has been that'll be 5 years. That's a pretty big length of time. One of the issues is it's hard to find land for a school. And so that's one of the things we're gonna look at with the general plan is school planning moving forward. And I want to be cognizant of my time. There's probably about 3 or 4 more slides, and I know we want to read for questions. Is that okay that I continue with these?
Yeah, Jeff, can we do about 2 more minutes of presentation? Is that
sure? That would work perfectly. Yeah, thank you. So this is really a summary of APFO. It kind of reiterates what I just said. One of the things to consider that comes up quite often is that APFO isn't a perfect system. You can't control housing resales. So turnover existing neighborhoods, you get crowding from that too. A lot of neighborhoods are 20, 30 years old, so families move out, new families move in. So you might have crowding in some school districts that have nothing to do with new housing. Over the time, programmatic changes can occur. For example, there was a period in the 1990s when class sizes were reduced for first and second grades to 19 children per classroom from 26. Plus full day kindergarten was implemented in the 2000s. It used to be half day was phased in over a period of time, the county had to basically double the size of the kindergarten classrooms, or build twice as many kindergarten classrooms to accommodate that. The other issue that the county is facing is the infrastructure is now getting old. The county, it's middle aged. It was built, growth started in earnest in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So all those schools that were built at that time period need to be replaced and rebuilt. So limited capital dollars are needed to build new schools plus replace existing schools. That's going to become more of a problem moving forward. Just two more slides here. So this is quickly. This is like leading indicator. I mentioned growth is slowing. This shows how growth is slowing. So a pre-submission meeting is when a developer has to come and hold a pre-submission meeting with the community before they submit a plan to DPZ. So since they started in 27, there was about 24 of those meetings every 6 months. Since the APFO was amended in July 19, when it became effective with the change of the school districts and the new high school test added, the capacity being reduced, we've had this many come in each 6 months. As far as units, about 740 units every 6 months. We double that, that's the 1,500 units that were built per year. The last 18 months, we've had this many. So the plans coming into the county has slowed dramatically since the APFO was effective in July 2019. So it's been effective in terms of new housing not coming to Howard County, which was it was intended, I think, to do that to hold projects up. It's a question of whether if it's too aggressive, because then you have to balance things. You need revenue from the new units. You need the school surcharge for the money to come in to pay for the capital facility. So if you don't have units coming in, then you can't have the revenue. So this was intended to be a balancing act, three-legged stool. If one of those legs is missing, then the stool doesn't function very well. You need good planning and APFO. The school system needs to redistrict, and you need to have the revenues and the capital budget to pay for the new facilities required. And that is it. So I appreciate your time, and sorry to go a little bit further. Yeah.
Highlight some nuanced complexities of this work for sure. Thank you very much. Can we stop sharing? Can you?
Sure.
Well, actually, I will scroll through. I just can't see everyone. There we go. All right, so let's do the same thing. We have about 15 minutes, 10 minutes for Q&A. So by show of hands, I'll just kind of go around the room if folks have questions. Vonda?
So I had a question, and maybe this was a misunderstanding. Are there situations where, in terms of whether or not is it a case with the schools that it's either open or closed, or can developers get exceptions by saying, well, this is a senior project, and so it wouldn't have an impact on the school?
Right. So senior housing or age-restricted housing is exempt from the schools test because there's no school children in the homes. So that's built into the law. They're exempt.
Okay. Yeah. And then this is more maybe a comment. It seems like there's a mismatch between where schools are open and where the allocations are.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Currently, if you remember that map, the allocation areas are pretty broad, right? You have the brown area, which was the established communities area, and then you had the pink area that was like the Route 1 area. And so that question has come up, trying to match the allocations to the school districts. It started that way, and there's a reason why it sort of migrated away from that, and it's sort of nuanced. But the current situation really is there is no the allocations are not the limiting factor at the current time. So the adopted general plan, the numbers in that plan are not being achieved as envisioned right now because growth has been slowing, and it's been that way for the last 3 or 4 years. So when we do the new general plan, that's a good point. One of the discussion pieces has been how to better sort of align the allocations, and is it even working still? Do we need to change things? One thing is that the Howard County, the future of Howard County is going to be redevelopment, not so much the greenfield development because land is running out. And so how does APFO need to be changed to be able to accommodate that new sort of growth paradigm? And how can things be matched up better? So all those questions need to be addressed, in the next few years once the general plan is adopted.
Thank you. Peter, I saw your hand up. Anyone else? Feel free to raise your hand. I'll kind of mentally know it's okay. Peter, Jonathan, Phil.
Hi, Jeff. Hope you're doing okay.
Peter.
So I think if you were to overlay the school closure map with areas of the county that are available for multifamily development, you would essentially have almost complete exclusion of multifamily development, other than senior properties, which you noted were exceptions from schools. And this is really more for comment, I think, than a question. And I know a number of years, the school district did not redistrict. And so that kept more schools closed, and redistricting is still controversial. And it feels like the school system is responsible for redistricting. The county is responsible for the definition of APFO, but this is not done in concert. And because the school board is separately elected, they have different pressures. So if we're a group looking at how to change the county's laws and systems in order to rationalize this and make reduce inequities for people, and I do believe multifamily housing, affordable housing is one of those. It seems to me that a way to help get there would be to coordinate these systems better. I don't know, clearly it's hard to remove power or move power around or whatever that would require, but it doesn't feel to me like they're coordinated now in a way that would really accomplish what I think of as planning. It seems instead like there are a couple different forces being brought to bear, and as a result, you sort of end up with this minimal, the sort of the least, I guess the most restrictive really combination.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can comment that all has been acknowledged by all parties, right? So all parties acknowledge that, and all parties are trying to remedy the situation. The school system did do a redistricting the previous year, which did help spread things out. The next redistricting is expected to occur, I believe, when the new high school 13 opens up, which will also help things. So there is a clear recognition that that needs to happen, and that hadn't been done in the past. But it is a difficult issue because redistricting is contentious, and things can be improved in Howard County. But if you compare us to other counties, also, like for example, Montgomery County, they refused to redistrict for a decade. There were schools that were at 50% capacity where growth was stopped in other parts of the county because so Howard County, despite its issues, have really tried to come together and work together to resolve this issue. It can be improved upon, and I think we have an opportunity now to improve upon it more with this next general plan, since it's sort of the umbrella of how APFO works. We are making an effort to work with stakeholders of the school system and staff of the school system as part of this general plan effort to come up with better ways to do things moving forward, for sure. I think you're muted.
Lauren, you're muted.
Am I up now?
Lauren was speaking, but she was muted. Oh. Sorry, Lauren.
Thank you. Yep, you'd think I'd learn after a year being inside. Nonetheless, let's do Jonathan, Phil, and then I just want to note, Suzanne, Tanika, you have an opportunity to ask questions. Just want to make sure, in the spirit of all voices being heard and space for everyone. So.
Okay, so thanks, Jeff, for coming out. I actually, Peter sort of asked the question I was going to ask about coordination of the school system. So now I think I'll make more of a statement to our subgroup for consideration based on my own observation. Yes, the school system has redistricted. It's redistricted a couple of times over the past 5 years or so. It'll do it again. my observation, and this is really a close-up observation because it's happened in the community I'm in, there's still hesitation among the members of the school board to go, I'll just say, too far with redistricting, or to maybe populate certain schools that are less popular than others. So we still do have a situation after redistricting where you have very overcrowded, I'll just stick to the high schools because they're fewer. You have very overcrowded high schools sharing borders with high schools that aren't even hitting capacity yet. So, it sounds like there is coordination going on. That's great. But I think one of the things we have to consider from a land use perspective as we're making potential recommendations to the county council is the extent to which the county council wants to let the school system make these, suboptimal decisions and then, let their legislation, create basically perverse outcomes, because I don't think what they intended with APFO is necessarily what's happening, because they don't control the way the schools get populated, and the schools aren't necessarily populated in the most rational, optimal way, and then you get pockets of areas that are closed where perhaps people who are looking for the opportunities to attend those schools can't get in. You have pockets that are open where maybe the prospects for development aren't that great because they're built out areas. So you're looking at more of redevelopment if that can happen. And you have a school system that's continuously trying to acquire very expensive and less available land to build new schools while it's not fully using all the facilities it has. So I do think this is something that we can look at from a land use perspective and make some recommendations to the council about maybe some of the perverse outcomes of legislation like APFO if there's not some consideration for what other entities are doing and how their decisions can make APFO potentially not work to the best of its capabilities.
Right. Just one comment. So I think there's an opportunity moving forward because the remaining available land, there's not much land left. And so where growth will occur, we know where it is. And so part of one thing that can be done is to target locations of new schools where that growth is going to occur. So it's different now because we're in a redevelopment sort of situation. So it could be more like master planning, like downtown Columbia had a master plan. There was a plan that included the provisions of schools before through these things called SEPAs. So that kind of planning effort probably might be a tool or a way to try to make that connection between the school system and the county.
Thank you. Okay, Phil, and then again, Suzanne, Tanika, if you'd like.
Well, I think some of the things that I wanted to mention have already been brought up in conversation, but there is the uncomfortable feeling that, does the school board react in redistricting to the pressure of certain allocations to make them more desirable? And sometimes it's almost mind-boggling when you see what goes on, and I won't go into it, but I think many of us feel that this whole process it can be pretty ugly, especially if it's a very desirable school and desirable district. Thank you.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for your presentation. The statement that there's not much land left. I'm not a, professional development person, but the maps that I'm looking at, it looks like there are huge swaths of land that are undeveloped. And so, is the West completely out of question in terms of land development? Is that just a rookie question?
No, I think it's a good question. So one thing that may help, we put together some assessment reports as part of the general plan process. So if you go to Hoco by Design, and if you look at physical assessment reports, there's a lot of maps on there that show how much land is undeveloped. And so that really shows pretty clearly that there's currently about 2% of land that's undeveloped in the county. In the rural west, most of it is in the rural west. And so there are areas of the rural west that are available. And what the rural west is there's also a lot of preservation in the rural west, because the intent in the 1990s was to create an agricultural preservation area and environmental preservation area. So a lot of that has been achieved over the last 30 years. So what may seem like a lot of open space is actually permanently preserved agriculture.
Okay, so it is being used for agriculture?
Yes, much of it is. Yeah, yeah. And also there's a report that shows, there's also an assessment report that talks about the agricultural preservation areas of Howard County in western Howard County.
Got it.
Thank you.
One of the recommendations of the master plan housing task force that Kelly mentioned was to expand the planned service area boundary to allow more room for housing. So we are looking into that and the feasibility and how much land could be acquired from that. There's a lot of difficulties with doing that because the policy has been set from the 1990s, and the treatment plant, for example, in the Little Patuxent, it's meant for growth in the east. It's not meant for further growth in the west. Number one. Number two, a lot of the development patterns in the west have been set, meaning either preserved land or it's been cluster subdivision under the rural west zoning regulations. There's not a lot of available land to really put new subdivisions. Having said that, there still are opportunities for some expansion into the rural west. So it's not something that's completely off the table. It's just not as easy, and from a policy perspective and from a sort of an infrastructure capacity perspective, a lot of thought would be kind of put into it. But it is a potential solution to provide areas for further housing out there. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I say what?
It's not. You're not going to get lots of housing out there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's much room.
Suzanne, I know that you and others have brought up the development of the West and those possibilities. So I'll just even take on my facilitator hat for a moment, speak for myself that it may be worth that follow-up conversation, maybe one-on-one, Jeff, if you'd be willing to talk about the policy barriers that are there, and how those could be addressed, or where there might be opportunity and challenges in terms of political will.
Right, and then stay tuned. So please attend the Growth Summit workshop, because these points will be discussed in that too. And
Right.
one of the scenarios actually is an expansion of part of the rural west. So it is part of that scenario discussion.
So there you go, folks. Mark your calendars. Thank you, Jeff. And Tanika, I would like to close this out ideally by 5:30, but I want to give both of you that space to ask questions if something's on your mind. Anything? Great, Tanika, because you're not on camera.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm multitasking.
Okay,
I
no
don't
worries.
have any questions. I'm just absorbing kind of all of the information. And some of the questions that I did have, some panelists, members already asked already.
Great. Okay, good. Is there anyone else that I'm just, everyone's photos have moved a bit during conversation, so my visual tracking is a little spinning, but I believe everyone has kind of shared a question or two. So I want to invite, if you have other follow-up questions, jot them down. We'll gather and bundle them, and Felix will share them with Kelly and Jeff, who I'm sure we'll be in touch with, as so much of your work intermingles with what we're considering. So thank you on behalf of this group for joining us. We really appreciate it, your expertise, your time, the work that you put into preparing, and your helpful answers to our group members' questions. So thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
As a public meeting, you're welcome to remain. But our group is going to transition to the next agenda item.
Don't be offended, but I'm not to.
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay.
Jeff.
Bye.